Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Letter 1. To Mrs. Saville, England. St. Petersburg, December 11th. You will be happy to hear that no disaster has occurred at the beginning of my enterprise, which you have regarded with evil forebodings. I am far north of London, and I can feel the icy climate of the pole upon my cheeks. With this feeling, I become very excited, since my dreams become more vivid. If I can land on a part of the world never visited and the country of the eternal light, I will satiate my curiosity and my hunger for knowledge. You know, my education was neglected, but I was passionately fond of reading. In our Uncle Thomas's library, I read a lot of books about the expeditions made in the prospect of arriving at the North Pacific Ocean through the seas which surround the pole. Now I am on this expedition. After the failure in writing poems, I have been in the pursuit of my new dreams of being an explorer for 6 years. I have worked too hard to go on this voyage, and I don't intend to return without victory. Your affectionate brother, Robert Walton. Letter 2. To Mrs. Saville, England. Archangel, March 28th. I am busy with collecting my sailors, who seem to be reliable and quite courageous. However, my dear sister Margaret, I have no intimate friend here, which troubles me a lot. I am in need of someone who can share my happiness if I can be successful, or my disappointment in case of failure. These sailors are good men, and my lieutenant is a man of wonderful courage and enterprise. He is gentle and disciplinarian. He has a romantic life story. He once loved a Russian girl who is richer than him. The girl's father didn't allow them to get married because of his poverty, but when my lieutenant won a considerable sum in prize money, the father consented to their marriage. Before marriage, the girl told him to spare her because she loved another man, but that was not the real reason. The real reason was that the girl's father does not consent to the marriage because of the lieutenant's poverty. That was his story. I am happy to have such a lieutenant on my ship, but since he is not an educated man and is too silent, I still feel lonely. You may deem me romantic, Margaret, for my feelings. You may not hear from me for some time, but please you write me because I really need to hear from you. Remember me with affection if you never hear from me again. Your affectionate brother, R. Walton. Letter 3. To Mrs. Saville, England. July 7th. I am writing in haste just to tell you that I am safe. We had no trouble remarkable to write in the letter. My sailors are courageous. They can cope with the dangers. I am advancing toward my ideals. Heaven bless my beloved sister. R.W. Letter 4. To Mrs. Saville, England. August 5th. Last Monday, very dangerous things happened to us. We were surrounded by ice and the weather was foggy. We waited for a change in the situation, and later, when the mist cleared away, we saw a gigantic figure of a man on a sledge drawn by dogs. We watched it with our telescopes, but it disappeared. 2 hours later, we could move our ship, and I went for a rest. In the morning, I went upon deck to see the sailors talking to a man on a sledge in the sea. The sailors were trying to persuade the man to go on our ship. He asked me our destination, and when I told him, he accepted to go on the ship. He was in a wretched condition, and we helped him to recover from this condition. We wrapped him up in blankets, placed him near the chimney of the kitchen stove, and 2 days later he was able to speak to us. He had a mysterious foreign accent. The sailors were asking him a lot of idle questions, but I didn't let them tire the poor man. Then we learnt that he was seeking the one whom we saw the night before. When he learnt that, we saw that demons, that's how he called the figure. He became excited and asked a lot of questions to be sure. After that, the stranger wanted to stay on the deck to watch for the demon on the sledge. Since it would be bad for his health, I promised him to tell one of my men to watch for it. You remember, Margaret, I was complaining that I had no friend. Now I think this stranger was once a very noble creature before his misery, and we may be good friends with him. August 13th. My affection for my guest increases every day. He has a very cultivated and noble mind. I feel both admiration and pity for him. How can such a noble creature be destroyed so much? I told him about my dreams and the aim of my voyage, but he didn't approve my excitement. At first he didn't tell me anything, but then he said, "Do you share my madness? Hear my story, and you will dash the cup from your lips." He was too weak to tell his story. When he felt better, he asked me to tell my story, and so I did. After hearing my excitement for knowledge and exploring new worlds, he told me that unlike me, he had no hopes in life, since he is destroyed. Margaret, I am overwhelmed by this wanderer's mysterious looks and speech. August 19th. The stranger told me that he had a marvelous story to tell me. He said that he was once so seeking knowledge and wisdom, but this cost him a life. The man added that he would tell his story for me, since it resembles mine. Chapter 1. My name is Victor Frankenstein. I am from a wealthy and distinguished Genevese family. My parents had a very strong tie of affection to unite them. My father and my grandfather had been good friends, and after my grandfather's death, my mother, then she was a poor orphan, had been supported by my father. So, they loved each other very much. My father did anything for my mother's happiness. My mother was so fragile that we had to travel constantly, and I was born in Naples during one of these travels. As their eldest child, I was their idol. They loved me very much, and I loved them in the same way. But my mother had always wanted a daughter. When I was 5 years old, my mother brought a little girl with blonde hair and fair skin, Elizabeth Lavenza, to be my sister. She was an orphan and was living with a poor family. My mother had seen her there and decided to protect her. When my father came back from Milan, he saw this girl and they decided to adopt her. So she became more than my sister. Chapter 2. Elizabeth and I were brought up together. Although we had quite different characteristics, we could get on very well. Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, whereas I was enthusiastic about getting the mysteries of life and was thirsty for knowledge. Elizabeth was interested in poetry and the surroundings of our Swiss home, while I was interested in the elixir of life. After my brother's birth, my parents decided to return back to our home in Switzerland. There I had a few friends, since I avoided a crowd. Henry Clerval was one of my friends. He loved enterprise, hardship, and danger. He composed heroic songs and wrote tales of knights. He dreamt to be like one of the historic figures he admired. But my dream was different. I was wondering the secret of life, and I was interested in the metaphysical works. I was fascinated with the works of Cornelius Agrippa, an alchemist who had tried to turn tin to gold and human beings into lions. When my father saw me reading Agrippa's book, he just said, "Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash." Ah, if only had my father explained to me why it was trash. If only he had said that the principles of Agrippa had been proven false. He just said it was trash and nothing more. As a young boy, I didn't care about what my father had told me about my favorite book. I continued reading it and more about the fancies of some Roman idols. I desired to give life to the dead and raise them. I thought that I would achieve my dreams by means of the fancies of these authors. When I was 15 years old, I lost my belief in these Roman idols after a lightning during a storm. A man of great research was with us, and he explained the reason of these catastrophes. After that, I realized the scientific face of the life and engaged myself in math. Chapter 3. When I was 17, my father decided to send me to the University of Ingolstadt. He wanted me to learn different cultures in different countries. I was getting prepared to leave home, but something miserable happened to us at that time. Elizabeth had got scarlet fever and fell into bed. My mother became so sad to see her beloved daughter in this situation, and she took care of her, in spite of the danger of contagion. A few days later, Elizabeth recovered from her illness, but my mother, Caroline Frankenstein, fell ill. On her deathbed, my mother requested my marriage with Elizabeth, joining our hands. She was gone. I couldn't believe that, but she was gone. It was really difficult to get used to it. Before losing them, you cannot understand how you are dependent on your loved ones. It was really hard to accept my mother's death. Elizabeth was also destroyed by this death, but she tried to seem calm and comfort us. Before my departure for Ingolstadt, Henry came to see me. He also wanted to join me at the university, but his father was a narrow-minded man, and he did not allow him to be a university student. At the university, it would be difficult to have friends. At home, I had got a few friends, but I would be alone away from home. I would have to form my life myself then. I was not used to talking to strangers, and I would have to get used to it. In my first days at the university, I met a professor, Monsieur Kremp. I can call him the angel of destruction, since he was one of these who influenced my fate. I talked to him about the books of the Roman idols, and on hearing me, he advised me to read new books about science instead of those foolish things. I was not disappointed just because I had already left these Roman writings and lost interest in natural philosophy. Yet one day I attended a lecture of a professor named Monsieur Waldman, who believed that new scientists could perform miracles, get unlimited powers, and mock the invisible world with its own shadows. That day I understood that I had got the enthusiasm of getting the knowledge of the mysterious life again. Chapter 4. From this day, my sole interest had been natural philosophy and chemistry. With great ardor, I read books of the modern scientists. I attended the lectures of Monsieur Kremp and Monsieur Waldman. For 2 years I had been studying so hard that I had no chance to write to Geneva nor to go there. I had improved so much that I began to make discoveries in chemistry. I had become a recognized figure at the university. One day I decided to go back to Geneva, seeing that I had obtained everything I could have at the university. Yet I had developed a great interest in another study, that was, the structure of the human frame. I wanted to solve what animated the human body. It was a bold question. Yet, I thought that without boldness, nobody could achieve the knowledge of life. To examine the causes of life, I must first recourse to death. So I started to examine the progress of human decay. I spent my days pillaging graveyards. At last I found the cause of generation in life. I was astonished by what I had realized. A great many scientists hadn't discovered this, but I, Victor Frankenstein, achieved this. With this excitement, I had my days and nights in my laboratory. I was feeling as if all the power in the world was in my hand. So obsessed was I in my unholy studies that I didn't write to my family at all. This progress was the beginning of my end, and, you will see, my lust for knowledge made me so miserable, sir. Chapter 5. It was on a dreary night of November that I achieved my aims. My creation had come to life. It was 1 a.m, a rainy morning. I saw the dull yellow eyes of my creation. He was breathing hard, and his limbs were agitating. You cannot guess my feelings. I had been working on this creation for 2 years with the purpose of giving life to an inanimate body, and now he was lying alive in front of me. His limbs were in proportion, his hair was black. The creature's parts were beautiful, and I had chosen them because they were beautiful. Yet the finished body was hideous. That was a real catastrophe. He had watery and inhuman eyes, thin black lips, and pearl-white teeth. For 2 years I had worked on this creature. But then, when it was finished, I felt terribly disappointed. That was the end of my beautiful dreams. Horror and disgust filled my heart. I couldn't bear the appearance of this creature and rushed out of the room. Lying on my bed, I just tried not to think about the incident. Bad dreams didn't leave me alone. I saw Elizabeth and I embraced and kissed her, then found that it was not Elizabeth but my mother's corpse lying in my arms. That was a horrifying nightmare. When I woke up, I saw the creature at my bedside. He was looking at me with his large eyes and with a smile on his face. He muttered some inarticulate sounds, trying to talk to me. He was holding me to detain me, but I escaped out of the house and decided not to turn back until morning. That night was a hard one. I walked in the streets in rain. My body felt too weak. The most comforting thing was seeing Henry Clerval on the street at that time. We were both happy to see each other. We started to walk to my home. At last, my father permitted me to study at Ingolstadt, said he. What about my father, my brothers, and Elizabeth? Very well, but they are a bit uneasy because of you. You rarely write to them. Why do you do so? Said he, and gazing at my face, he continued. Oh, my dear, you seem so ill and pale. I've been working hard these days, and that's why I am so weak and pale. When we arrived at my home, I saw that the creature had gone, which was very good for me. I was so happy to see that the monster had left that I clapped and behaved hysterically. I had a nervous fear which made me bedridden for months. Henry had to take care of me. When I recovered a little, Henry told me to write a letter to my family in my handwriting, since there was a letter from Elizabeth waiting for a reply. Chapter 6. I took the letter and started to read it. My dearest cousin, you have been seriously ill, and Henry informed me that you couldn't hold even a pen. Yet, I am looking forward to hearing from you and reading some words in your handwriting. My uncle wanted to visit Ingolstadt, but I thought that it would be dangerous for his health. Clerval writes that you are getting well. Thanks to him. He is a real friend, that he has always been with you during your illness. Here, I cannot be so happy as I was with you. Nothing is good without you. Nothing changed except the children's growth. Your younger Ernst is now 16, and he wants to join the foreign service. Your brother William is now 5 years old and is having a good time here. Do you remember our Justine, the girl your mother and father so much loved? After your mother's death, we were so sad to notice Justine, and she was very ill. Then her brother and sister died. Justine's mother, losing her children, wanted Justine to be with her. So she went to stay with her mother. Now the old woman is dead, and Justine has come back to us. That is what has happened in Geneva. I would really like to see you here, Victor. Please try to write a few lines for me. I am looking forward to hearing from you. Elizabeth Lavenza. My dear Elizabeth had written this. After reading this letter, I wrote to them to lessen their anxiety. 2 weeks later, I could leave my chamber. Henry and I went to the university, and I introduced Henry to the professors, which was a real torture for me. The university reminded me of my creation. Natural philosophy gave me violent agony. Clerval saw this, and he changed my apartment and removed all my apparatus. Henry himself came to this university to study Oriental languages and literature. He had never sympathized with my taste for natural sciences. I decided to go to Geneva, but I had to wait for the spring because of the hard winter. We spent the winter with Clerval together. I was happy to be with him again. The hours I spent with him was calming me and reminding me of my old happy days. When the spring came, we returned to our university and to our studies. Everything seemed to be in order, like in the old days. Chapter 7. On my return, I saw a letter from my father. Dear Victor, I know you expect a happy and glad welcome, but I am sorry to tell you that we have bad news for you. Tears will welcome you, since your youngest brother, William, is dead. The sweet and angelic child is gone. He has been murdered. It happened when we were on our usual walks. William and Ernest were playing together, and then they disappeared. We waited for them, but only Ernst came back. He said that they had been playing hide and seek. William had gone and he couldn't find him. In the evening we found out his body lying on the ground. Oh, my dear child, when Elizabeth saw William's corpse, she said that she had murdered him, and in great agony she fainted. She had given him your mother's valuable miniature, and the murderer had taken it. Maybe had killed because of it. That's why she feels guilty. Your arrival at home will be a great comfort for us. Alphonse Frankenstein. Reading this letter, I closed my face with my hands and I cried loudly. Henry took the letter and learnt the events. He became so shocked, too. That day, I left Ingolstadt for Geneva. On the way, an irrational fear seized me. I dare not advance. Each step towards Geneva terrified me. I didn't know the reason, but I had a foreboding that something dreary would happen. I had to stop and wait to collect my strength. On the way, I saw the familiar places of my childhood, which was quite comforting. At night, there was a severe thunderstorm. It was completely dark, and I saw a figure in the lightning. It was a huge figure. It was my monster's, to my surprise. I was sure that it was my monster. It was me who killed William. No one can conceive the anguish I suffered during the night which I spent in cold and wet air. I arrived home in the morning. At first, I decided to tell the story to my family, but then changed my mind. My story was a frantic one. No one would believe me. It was a madman's story, so I decided to keep silent. At home, my brother Ernst met me. He told me that he knew the murderer of William. He said that Justine Moritz, the girl who had been living with us, was guilty because the picture of my mother, William had on him the day of the murder, had been found in her pocket. When I heard this, I told him that she couldn't be guilty because I knew who had murdered William. My father and Elizabeth came, and we talked about this for hours. Chapter 8. Until 11 o'clock we passed a few sad hours. My family had to attend the court of Justine as witness. I went with them to this tormenting court. It was really tormenting for me. Because of me, William had died, and at the end of the trial, poor Justine could be executed. Justine was calm during the trial. She believed in her innocence, so she was tranquil. The witness came and said what they had seen on the day of the murder. A woman said that she had seen her near the spot the murdered child had been found. The woman had asked her what she had been doing there. Justine had seemed to be confused and strange. Then, at the sight of William's corpse, she had become hysterical. The strongest evidence was the picture of Mrs. Frankenstein. In defense, Justine told the events in her point of view. She said that she had passed the night of murder at her aunt's house. After hearing William's disappearance, she had searched for him and she had behaved strangely because of her pathos and tiredness. After that, a few more witnesses were listened, but they didn't tell tangible things for the sake of Justine. So she was condemned to death. She was as innocent as an angel, but we had nothing to do. She was executed. She was the second victim of my ambition. Chapter 9. I was the cause of two angelic people, William and Justine. But I couldn't tell this to anyone. Nobody would believe me. I had brought sadness to my family. I wanted to commit suicide, but what would happen to my family then? This would make Elizabeth and my poor father worse. My father saw my sadness and told me to get stronger, however difficult it was. We went to our family house in Bellerive, which was comforting for me. At nights, I went on the lake and thought about my misdeed. I wanted to kill myself, but Elizabeth's love and my hate for the monster detained me. I went on walks in the Alps, thinking that the wild nature of the mountains would calm me. There, I thought about the monster and his victims. When I thought of them, I gnashed my teeth, my eyes became inflamed, and I ardently wished to extinguish the life of the monster. I swore to get revenge on this horrible creation. Elizabeth was changed by the events too. She lost her faith in human beings. She said she believed in Justine's innocence, but many people wouldn't do so. She hated the human desire for blood and crime, yet she told me to calm myself down for the good of the family. Chapter 10. I wandered in the valley of Chamonix. This place was wonderful, and the sublime scene afforded me the greatest consolation that I was capable of receiving. I decided to climb to the top of Montauvert, which really excited me. Everything was perfect until I suddenly saw the figure of a man. It was moving so fast that I thought it couldn't be human. When it came nearer to me, I perceived that it was the sight I hated, the monster I created. Rage and hatred filled my body. Devil, how do you dare approach me? I will kill and destroy you. You killed my relatives, said I. I expected this response from you. You are my creator. You gave me life. I will do my duty towards you if you do yours toward me. You left me alone and didn't listen to me. You don't have the right to this. Why did you create me if you wouldn't like me? Now listen, if you don't comply with my conditions, I will kill the others, said the monster. I will kill you! You killed William and Justine, said I, and jumped on him. He was so strong that in one moment he avoided me. I will not do any harm to you, since you are my creator. Don't forget that you created me stronger than yourself, Frankenstein. If you make me happy, I will make you happy too. Now you listen to my story. I thought about what he talked about then and decided to listen to him. He might be right. He was my creation, and I hadn't fulfilled my duties toward him. So I followed him. Chapter 11. The monster told me his story when we found a place to sit down. I cannot remember the time of my creation. It is confused and indistinct for me. The only thing I know that I didn't learn anything, but then learnt a lot by myself. For a long time I couldn't understand the difference between light, smell, and sound. The sunlight and the heat were oppressive for me, so I went to the forest near Ingolstadt. This place was better for me. I drank from the river and ate fruits on trees. In time, I started to get used to the light, smell, and heat. I could perceive things, the sounds of birdsong, the moonlight. One day, I found a fire left by people when I was oppressed by the cold. The fire warmed me, and I didn't let the fire die putting woods on it. It was cold outside under the snowy weather. I was in need of help, but people around me were all bad toward me. They were shouting at me or throwing stones at me. One day, while I was wandering, I found an old man living in a hut. I went in looking for a friend, but the man shrieked and escaped when he saw me. I was so sad and disappointed. You cannot understand my feelings. I escaped from that place, and the people in the village all shouted and shrieked when they saw me. They wanted to kill me and threw something toward me. I was badly injured by these barbarous people. At last I found a hovel which was attached to a hut. I knew that if people saw me, they wouldn't let me live in that place. So I hid in the hovel just to avoid the cold weather and snow. I slept there a few hours because I was too much exhausted. There was a hole in the wall so that I could see the inside of the hut. There were 3 people living together, an old man, a young girl, and a young boy. They had noble faces. They made some noises, but I couldn't understand them at all. Chapter 12. I lay in the hovel but couldn't sleep. I thought about the day. The family living in the hut was a happy one. I wanted to join them and be a part of them very much, but I decided that I should wait and hide in the hovel because people were all afraid of me. Day after day I watched these people. The boy left home in the morning and came home carrying woods on his shoulders. The girl took care of the old man and the house. Then I understood that the old man was blind. I continued my life stealing from these people's food when they went to bed at night. I stole from them until I understood that they were suffering from poverty and they had never enough food. The young girl and the boy put their food on the blind man's plate, even though they were hungry. On this, I became so unhappy, and I decided not to take food from them, but to find somewhere outside. The family members were so kind to each other. I wanted to do some favors for them, but what? Seeing the young man always spending time outside in pursuit of wood, I went out at night and collected some wood for them. In the morning, they saw the wood pile and they were so surprised. Thanks to these 3 people, I learned to speak. The first words I learned were fire, bread, father, and some other words like these. I understood that the young boy was named Felix, brother or son. The old man was called only father. The girl was called sister or Agatha. I saw my face in a transparent pool once. At that time, I understood why people escaped from me. I was hideous, while the 3 people had really beautiful images. I thought that I shouldn't let these people see me, or they would also hate me forever. Summer was coming, and I went on watching this family. I didn't stop my help for these people. I continued to collect wood and did a lot of things for them. They always got surprised and became happy. When they became happy, I became happy too. They were wondering who this wonderful creature was, and I was looking forward to getting introduced with these friends. This would happen when I could speak like them. Chapter 13. One day, a lady on horseback came to the cottage when the old man was playing his guitar and the other 2 were listening to the melody. She was dressed in a dark suit and covered with a thick, dark black veil. Her voice was melodic but was different than my friend's. She came for Felix. When Felix saw her, he became delighted and pleased. I soon understood that this lady had a different language than my friends. She spoke Arabic and her name was Safi. As this exotic girl didn't know the cottagers' language, Felix tried to teach her their language. That was of great help to me. I had the chance to listen to Felix teaching her their language, and so I learned the language in a few months. I started to understand what the cottagers were talking about. In the evenings, they read some parts from a book named The Ruin of Empires, which consisted of the history of human manners, religions, governments, wars. I listened to them from the whole every evening to improve my language and to learn something. This book taught me the human behaviors, how they killed and implored each other. I often wept when I heard the barbarity of mankind, how they killed each other for money and for land. That fact made me disappointed at human affection. I understood the difference between the sexes. I also learnt that a baby is born in a family and it has a father and a mother who become happy by its birth. The mother always cares for her child. The father protects and loves his family. When I got all of this knowledge, I thought about my loneliness. I had no friends and no family at all. I was alone and miserable. My father had left me. I had never seen a being resembling me. What was I? Chapter 14. When I had the ability to understand the family's language, I understood who they were. This was a French family who had been living in Paris until they met Safi's father. Safi's father was a Turkish merchant in Paris, and he was a Muslim. Because of his religion, he had been imprisoned by the French government. Everybody was aware that the Muslim merchant was not guilty, and that was not fair. Felix also knew that, and he decided to help the merchant to escape. He went to jail and told the merchant his plans. The merchant agreed. He promised Felix a lot of money and treasures. But Felix didn't want anything. He was in love with his daughter Safi. The merchant saw this and he promised to let his daughter marry Felix if they could escape. Felix helped him and the merchant escaped with his daughter. The French government understood that Felix had helped the Turk, so the family was exiled from the country and their land and money were taken away from them. The Turkish merchant didn't keep his promise and he didn't send his daughter to Felix. He didn't want his daughter to get married with a Christian. The family moved to the cottage a few months ago. Safi loved Felix and found him in that cottage by her own efforts when her father had to go away urgently. Now they were together again. That was the story of the family I was so loyal to. Chapter 15. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers. It impressed me deeply, and it taught me what virtue was. One night I was wandering in the neighborhood for collecting my food and some woods for the family. I found some books in a bag: Paradise Lost, a volume of Plutarch's Life, and The Sorrows of Werther. That was a perfect prize for me, since I was hungry for knowledge. The more I read, the more I asked myself who I was. Paradise Lost was my favorite of the 3 books. It was about Adam and Eve's story. Adam wanted his Creator to give him a female, and his Creator did so. He had a father at least, but I didn't have anyone. This made me desolate and unhappy. Maybe I was like the Satan who didn't have a father. No, he had his friends around him at least. My mind was full of questions. Safi's presence brought happiness to the family. There was more money, and Agatha and Felix didn't work hard. They were spending their time with Safi. They were quite happy, and I wanted to be a part of this happiness. I desired to introduce myself to my friends, but I was afraid of disapproval. My appearance was disgusting and terrifying. Whoever could see me would faint or run away screaming. I was conscious of this, so I decided to introduce myself firstly to the old and blind man. He wouldn't be able to see me, so would sympathize with me and help me to convince the other members of the family. Bearing this idea in my mind, I waited for the young members of the family to leave the cottage. One day, Felix, Agatha, and Safi went out for a walk, leaving the blind man alone. That was a chance for my enterprise. Making sure that the blind man was alone at home, I knocked on the door and went in. "Who are you?" the old man asked me. "I am a traveler and I am tired. I need a little rest," said I. "Come in and have some food there. I am blind. I cannot give it to you." "No, thanks. I came here because I want to win my friend's love." "I am afraid that they will not love me because of my appearance," said I. "Who are they?" "They are French." "Where do they live? I think they will love you. Why are you so uneasy? Appearance is not important," said he. This was so comforting for me. I was ready to tell him that the family was his. At that time, the young cottagers came in and saw me. I said that it was the de Lacy family I was talking about kneeling in front of the old man. But Agatha screamed and fainted. Safi ran out on seeing me. Felix beat me. I felt ruined by this rough response. I could have killed Felix, but I didn't do this because of my love for the family. Without hope, I ran to my hovel. Chapter 16. It would have been better if I had died that day. I cursed you because you had created me so ugly. The only thing I had wanted was a bit of love, nothing more. Hatred filled my heart. I tried to console myself, saying that everything was not finished yet. I could try to go into the cottage again. In the morning, I couldn't see anybody in the cottage. There was an unusual silence. I wondered what was going on. At that time, Felix came with 2 men. He was talking about the previous day. Soon I understood that they were leaving the cottage because Felix was afraid of his family's security. That was the time I collapsed. I had been abandoned. This night, I was maddened by deep thoughts and burnt the cottage down. I decided to find my Creator and take revenge on him. I knew about you because of some papers I had found in your laboratory. I knew that you were living in Geneva. I found a map and started my evil journey to Geneva. In Geneva, while I was walking, I saw a child playing and running. A hope seized my mind. He could have been my friend. Yet, when he saw me, he shrieked and tried to run away. I told him that I wouldn't do any harm to him. "You are a monster, let me go! You want to kill me, you disgusting creature! My father is Alphonse Frankenstein, he will punish you," said he. His words made me crazy. I understood that he was your brother. With the aim of giving you a great sorrow and pain, I killed the boy. It was just to take revenge on you. I saw a woman's picture of William. I thought that I would never be able to have the love of such a beautiful woman. With anguish I went away. On the way, I saw a woman lying on the ground. I watched her carefully and sought for love. I knew it was in vain. Leaving the picture in this woman's pocket, I went away. Now, creature, listen to me. I want you to create a female for me, since you are my creator. If you do this favor for me, I will take my spouse and go away. We will not disturb any human beings. Promise me. Chapter 17. The creature finished his story and looked at me in expectation of a reply. I was confused and couldn't say anything. The creature started to talk again. Create a female for me, my creator you are. This is my right. You cannot refuse it, said he. His speech and voice angered me, and I could no longer suppress the rage that burned me. Bewildered and perplexed, I refused to create a female for him. I do refuse to do this. I will never consent to this disgusting scheme. If you want, torture me or kill me, but I will never accept your plan. Don't be mad. If you give me a spouse, I will go away from people. I will go to South America with her. If you don't create a female, I will damage human beings and your family, of course. I want a piece of love, or I will be miserable and dangerous. I will revenge my injuries, if I cannot inspire love. You see, I am stronger than any human being. If I want, I can do everything to anybody. You'd better do what I say. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my consent. I thought that the creature may have some justice in his argument. You will never repent if you consent. We will go and nobody will see us again. You can be sure. Okay, I accept it, said I. I will try to create a female for you, if you will go away from human beings. I want to save humanity from your hatred and rage. I am going now. I will always be watching you, and I will visit you again. I am looking forward to seeing my spouse. The creature went away. I saw his huge figure disappearing into the distance. Chapter 18. Weeks passed after I had promised to work on the new creature. I couldn't collect the courage to start walking. I was afraid of the monster's anger, but I still couldn't start working since I knew that I needed months for study and the strength for this process. I had heard of some discoveries by an English philosopher which was necessary for my study, so I planned to take my father's consent for visiting England. My health was better. I was feeling quite strong. My father was glad to see me in better condition. I am happy to see you restored. You seem to be returning to yourself, my son, said he. Then he added that I still seemed to be unhappy. I knew the reason of this unhappiness. Yet my father took it wrongly and said, You know, my boy, your mother and I always wanted you to marry Elizabeth, who is our dearest. But I know that you and Elizabeth are brought up like sister and brother. If you feel unhappy or if you love someone else, you don't have to marry Elizabeth. I am not going to be disappointed, you may be sure. You can believe me, Father, that I love my cousin Elizabeth so much and I want to marry her. She is the only woman I admire and the only woman I can devote myself to. That is not the problem. I have some business to do and I have to go to England for this. My visit to England was approved and it was understood that my union with Elizabeth should take place after my return. I would stay there as much as I needed. Elizabeth and my father didn't want me to go to England because the last time I went there I had been badly ill. They spoke to my friend Clerval, and Henry accepted to travel with me. We traveled to England through Germany and France. During the travel, I saw that Clerval was so young, energetic, and alive, unlike me, who was wretched, tired, and weak. We arrived in England in October. Chapter 19. We decided to stay in London for several months. Henry Clerval desired to talk to the men of genius and talent of the time. That interested me, but it wasn't my first aim. In the first hand, I wanted to get the necessary information for fulfilling my promise. This travel and the visits to the philosophers were disgusting to me because I was not willing to create a female for the monster, but I had to do this. These visits were obligatory. I learnt useful things from these philosophers. Unlike me, Henry was so excited. He wanted to go to India and learn the language there. He was creative and imaginative and wrote poems. I loved to be with him, but I knew I needed to be alone. One day, we received a letter from one of our common friends. He invited us to Scotland, which excited Clerval. I hated the community and wanted a little peace. Yet I decided to go there for the desire of seeing the mountains, streams, and wonderful nature. I thought that I would be able to study in the northern highlands of Scotland, so I took some necessary things for my laboratory. We went to Oxford and then to Edinburgh, together with Henry. Then I wanted him to leave me alone in the countryside. I found a quiet place for my plans. There were only 3 huts and 5 inhabitants, so nobody would see my dirty studies. Chapter 20. One night I was sitting in my laboratory after the sunset. I had stopped working for the day because of the inadequate light. I was thinking of my doings. There was a little work for the female monster, but my mind was full of questions. I thought that 3 years before I had the same thing which resulted in a nightmare. Now I was making the same mistake. The female creature might be a worse creature than the male monster. The male monster had promised to go away from human beings, but the new creature might refuse this. They might hate each other. I decided that this was a foolish task and was dangerous. At that time I saw the monster looking at me with a grin on his face. I went towards the body of the female creature and tore it into pieces. The monster howled in agony and ran away. I vowed to never start my studies again. Soon the monster visited me. "I break my promise. I won't do what you want. Go away," said I. "You are my creator. You must do this. If I am your creator, I am your master. Do what I want you to and go away. I will not do anything for you. You have always given me unhappiness. You taught me what hatred is. Now I say you will never be able to get this hatred out of me. You will pay for this. Wait for me on the day of your wedding." The monster said these words and went away. I sat alone in the laboratory and started to cry like a child. I thought of any damage the monster could give to Elizabeth. If he killed me, Elizabeth would be terrible. I decided that I wouldn't behave selfishly, but would think of all humanity, so I didn't give up. I picked up some of my laboratory equipment and went out of the city to join Henry in Perth. On the way, a crowd of people looked at me suspiciously. They were angry and called me a villain. I couldn't understand that. They told me that the magistrate was waiting for me since a gentleman was murdered the night before. Chapter 21. I was introduced to the magistrate, Mr. Kerwin. He was an old and good man. He called the witnesses and asked them about the incident. A fisherman came and told what he had seen. He said that he had been fishing on the day of the murder. He found the corpse of the gentleman on the sands. He had at first thought that the man had been drowned, but then understood that he had been murdered. They had seen black marks of finger on the neck of the victim. When they mentioned the finger marks on the neck, I remembered my brother's murder. I understood that this gentleman had been killed by the monster too. The witnesses said that they saw a man resembling Frankenstein on a boat in the middle of the night. The magistrate listened to all of the witnesses, then took me to the corpse. He showed me the corpse. I went to the coffin, and I was shocked and shuddered when I saw Henry Clerval lying lifeless in front of me. The monster had killed my friend, Henry. After Justine and William, he had taken Henry. That was incredible. I lay in fever for 2 months, blaming myself as the murderer of Justine, William, and Henry. I was lying in a prison, and a nurse was looking after me. She told me that it would have been better if I had died because of the murder I had committed. I hated the unfeeling woman. Mr. Kerwin behaved to me so kindly those days. He told me that I would be cleared of all my charges. I was getting better. He told me that a visitor came to see me. That was my father. I was calmed by the sight of my benevolent father. When he said that Ernst and Elizabeth were quite well, I was consoled a bit. My father's presence was good for my health, and I got better day by day. My charge was cleared and I was acquitted. I wanted to go to Geneva and protect Ernst and Elizabeth, but my father didn't accept it because of my health. A few times I tried to commit suicide, but I couldn't. That suicidal actions caused my father's close watch on me. He was always having his eyes on me. I wanted to go to Geneva, and at last I convinced my father to go together. Chapter 22. Our voyage came to an end, and we arrived in Paris. I was not eager to be among people, because I thought that I was an enemy to them because of my evil creation. The creation might damage any one of them at any time. My father saw me avoiding the society, and he thought it was because of the gossip that I was a murderer. He didn't know the reality. I said that I was the cause of the deaths of Justine, William, and Henry. My father thought that I said all of these stupid things in delirium, and he didn't believe it. I am not mad, Father. I tell you the truth, but you don't believe me. Please, Victor, don't say this again. Never make this assertion. As time passed, I became calmer and never talked about my crimes again. In a fortnight, I received a letter from Elizabeth. She was saying that she was so sad because of my illness, and assuring that if I had another girl to marry, she would consent to my marriage to the girl, even though she loved me. On receiving this letter from Elizabeth, I decided to get married as soon as possible. It was useless to wait and waste time. If the monster wanted to kill me on my wedding day, I would fight against him on that day. Elizabeth would be mad if I died, but I couldn't be selfish. That was a problem with humanity. We prepared everything for the wedding and for the honeymoon. Everything seemed normal during the nuptial day. For the honeymoon, we planned to go to the shores, and there I would take my pistols and daggers for the coming fight. I was uneasy and frightened. Chapter 23. At 8 o'clock we arrived at our destination. The night revived my fears. I was ready for any attack. We spent a short time outside the hut, watching the scene on the shore. Suddenly, a storm of heavy rain descended. We went to the hut, and there I behaved uneasily, which made Elizabeth suspicious. She asked me several questions about my state. I just told her that it was because of the place I had been panicked. Elizabeth went to the bedroom, and I waited for the monster to come. I didn't want Elizabeth to see the terrible fight. I walked up and down waiting for the monster. Suddenly, a scream was heard from Elizabeth's room. I went and saw that Elizabeth, my dear wife, was lying dead on the floor. I saw the finger marks on her neck. The monster had killed her. Why did he kill her but not me? I saw the murderer grinning at me, and I shot at him with my pistol, but he ran away. The noise of the pistol brought people into the room. I was crying in agony and begging people for help. Some people went out for the police. I wanted to run after the monster, but I was like a drunken man. Some people tried to find the monster, but they couldn't. I wept in the room, sitting near my dead wife. Suddenly I remembered my father and Ernst. I wondered whether they were safe or not, so I started a journey to Geneva. What would I do if they were killed too? When I arrived in Geneva, I saw that my father and Ernst were safe. I was a bit happy to see them safe, but there was bad news waiting for them. How could my father bear this? I told them about Elizabeth's death. They were shocked, and my father became badly ill. He died in a few days because of the shock and the sorrow this death had given to him. I thought that it was the end of my life. Everyone had been killed by my evil jobs. There was only one thing to do, that was to get revenge. First, I told everything to the magistrate and told him that the monster had to be caught for the good of human beings. The magistrate accepted it, although he had some worries about the job. He knew that it would be very difficult to fight against such a giant being. I told him that I would also follow the monster and slay him. Chapter 24. I decided to leave Geneva forever, taking all the money and the jewels with me, and I started my journey. Before leaving, I visited my father's, William's, and Elizabeth's graves for the last time. I vowed that I would get revenge and kill the monster. At that time, I heard a fiendish laugh. That was the monster. He told me that he was satisfied and happy to hear that I would continue living. I said that I would live till I could kill him. I pursued him but couldn't catch him. I have been chasing him for months. I still couldn't catch him, but I know that I am now too close to him. I went as far as Russia. I sometimes lost his trace, but the creature left some hints about his place. He wants me always to go after him. Now he took me to the North Pole. I bought some dogs to follow him. It was very useful, and the dogs were so fast that we got close to him, but the ice avoided me to advance. You know the rest of the story. I want to kill him, Walton, but I am too weak now. I know my death is near. Now, when I am too close to the victory, I have to go to the other world. Please, Walton, if I die, can you trace this monster for me? That would be a great favor for me and for all of humanity. Walton, in continuation. Margaret, you may not believe this terrific story, but that is all the truth. Poor Frankenstein died a few hours after this speech. I was sad after his death because he was a good friend, a real man. What do you think about his strange story, Margaret? Don't you think it's terrible? We laid the body of Frankenstein in a cabin. It was dreadful to think that he had died. I cannot forget his voice and his pale face. How he had suffered. The dead body was lying on the ship, which hurt me deeply. I went to the cabin in which the body was lying just to see him once more. There I saw a creature near the corpse. It was the monster. He was sad to see that his creator was dead. He was talking to the dead body. "He cannot hear you. Frankenstein is dead," said I. "I am sorry. I didn't want to murder anyone, but I had to. The only thing I wanted was a bit of love. Nobody loved me. They always looked at me in disgust. I couldn't stop killing. I didn't want to kill anyone, believe me. I wanted him to give me a wife, but he didn't give me this happiness, so I went and killed his wife. He was not fair. Now everything is finished. I am going to the north. I will make a big fire and burn myself in it. This fire will extinguish the fire and agony in my heart." The monster said this and jumped out of the ship into a boat. His figure disappeared into the darkness.